The AFL is a team sport, and to achieve success, you must play like a team. You can't be a team of individuals. As far as cliches go, nothing is more known than the phrase, "there's no I in team." In AFL terms, it doesn't necessarily mean everyone plays their role. I'm talking more about protecting your best players, putting a block on, or sacrificing your game to get the best out of others. Doing things that in the bigger picture are for the better of the team and their performance. Today, we'll be looking at how well Carlton do this, or the lack thereof. Now, when I think about playing for one another, these are the following words that come to mind: sacrifice, support, selflessness, and communication. I made up a set of metrics which, keep in mind, are subjective and adjudicated by yours truly. I counted in the entire game the amount of handball receives, and these are handball receives from a player who has taken a mark. I counted the amount of blocks, whether that be for key forwards in build-up play or shepherds in open play. And I counted how many times Patrick Crippa was aided at the stoppage, which is a little subcategory separated from blocks. In the first half, I counted 4 handball receives, 5 blocks, and 1 act of help for Crippa. In the second half, I counted 3 handball receives, 2 blocks, and no acts of help. This number needs to be beefed up. First, let's analyse our handball receives from marks, or the lack thereof. The handball receives we did execute, more often than not, were forward loopy hand passes that took a bit of time in transit, because the player providing the overlap is running away from the bloke who has taken the mark. This one to Newman is what I'm talking about. It is on Newman to find the balance of finding width, like he does here, without vacating himself from where Doc is. Then you can see by the time that Hollands takes a mark, it's like we might as well have resorted to the kick mark game because it ends up stagnant. Here we are seeing the fruitful results when the handball doesn't hold up the run of these players. You can see the Charlie handball keeps Walshy going and the transition is successful. But if I go back to this still, let me show you something. Not necessarily for this example, because Charlie actually waits to release the hand pass to Walshy, but I want the explosiveness and game-breaking pace to be capitalised on. So enough of these loopy handballs. Time your run so you can take the ball on the way through. You can see in open play, with some of our handball chains, the reason the transition is so much punch is because this is the nature of the handball receive. This example on the cusp of 3/4 time captures what I mean. Now, for every good execution of a handball receive, there's like 15 missed opportunities. Let's go to the first half where our conversion was shoddy. This kick by Harry in the middle is very beneficial if you use the chance wisely. Now, on this possession, Bailey Dale does well to prevent the hand pass to a player running through the middle that would help direct play. So no one's at fault, but you can see what happens when we prioritize going wide in spite of that. It doesn't help no one is leading up at Weeders, they're just staring at him, but we've had to go the long way round to only end up 60 meters from goal and have funneled ourselves into a corner. Here's another carbon copy example. Like we mentioned earlier, the handball is on the 90-degree angle to maximize the pace, and so we hit up Charlie 7 seconds after we held sole possession through Lewis Young for the first time. But I would have loved a wave of numbers to serve as a proposition for Charlie to hand it off to a passerby and Harry can hold his position deeper. Instead, we've gone sideways and have no direct marking target in the forward line. And while this does open up the fat side, Harry this year has loved to slow things down, and his kick has not been something Carlton supporters like talking about. Here was another opportunity for a handball receive. Harry took the mark at 14 seconds, and 9 seconds left, Charlie still isn't in the 50. The crowd want him to send it in ASAP, but where are teammates providing support? The burden has just been thrust onto Harry when really his teammates should be the ones sending it in there to him. Here's a similar example where we've gotten a 50-meter penalty in our favour. We should be sending this in rapidly. Why hasn't Walshy just held back to receive the handball and give it a bit of punch, instead of this being the end product because we've waited? Here's an example when there's another positive kick into the corridor. Walshy is too preoccupied on backpedaling that he's just burnt one of our quickest players who I'd back to beat others for pace if the hand pass is on the 90 and he doesn't need to break stride. Even here, Durds is on the floor after taking a mark, and the seconds he takes getting back up are extra seconds for numbers to flood back. Players should be running by so the handball can be released earlier. And equally, Durds needs to release the player with the footy. It's a two-way street. Instead, Durds waits seconds, kicks a little chip to Hollands, which takes even longer, and by that point you're asking the player to pick out a needle in the haystack, or in this case, a Carlton player in a flooded forward line. Simple handball receives would have allowed for a quicker switch across the ground and entry into the 50. I'll show you one more here. Harry's kick in the middle is good, but we need someone sweeping across with the kick to continue the play across and quicker. Instead, Kennedy is weighted. He had to kick it further and more lofted with no run and carry, and the Dogs have already been able to anticipate and process that the switch is happening. A handball receive here by Cincotta would be so much more effective if he didn't have to try and navigate through a zone because our switch took longer than it could have. I really enjoy this Bulldogs example because it captures what I'm talking about. English takes the mark, Johannesson gets the receive, and then the handball on the 90 means despite a bit of congestion, they can take that risk because the burst of pace is just going to penetrate right through all those Blues players that are surrounding, the ones that aren't on the move. And so the change of direction is successful with its unpredictability. The Dogs have the outnumber on the fat side and the Blues have to roll over. With all that space, the Dogs can just wriggle through without feeling hindered. And this is what a transition by us could look like if the handball receive was used more often. I see an eerily similar beginning with this example, but a very different ending because there was no handball. We go very wide as we ignore handball. Not one player is within a sniff of a handball receive on each one of these kicks, maybe to swing it the opposite way like Johannesson did. And so the time we do decide let's change direction, let's just do it when every Dog is back and the corridor is blocked off. We actually concede a goal from this. We saw with that Johannesson example as well, Tim English passes it off. At this point in the game, we're down 1 having just scored a goal and we've won a free kick in the centre. Why on earth is there no acknowledgement by any one of these players that Pitto can't kick? Chera fakes Arthur Jones out, and so that should be a no-brainer to get the handball receive. And even Cincotta's there if Pitto eventually changes his mind. If we did this, we could get a bit of drive from this possession and send it deeper into the forward 50. But instead, it's just a rubbish kick that doesn't enter the 50 and we turn it over. Give the ball off and the result of this game, let alone the result on this possession, could be a lot different. Now, Paddy Cripps. The man had 15 touches to three-quarter time. Over the course of the evening, his disposal efficiency was at 42%. Being the captain of the club, he's bound to cop his fair share of criticism. But one of the most documented things about Patrick Cripps is the fact no one at the Carlton Football Club helps this guy out. His main 2 opponents were Bailey Smith and Tom Liberatore, both equipped with unique capabilities, but a large key to containing Cripps was the physicality they applied. If you don't want to get bullied, you have to match the physicality, and if not, you've surrendered. It felt like Crippa had surrendered for the majority of the game, where understandably we needed him. At times, it felt like we were too spaced out, Crippa was isolated and nowhere near it, and he didn't really try to run in there or attack it. There were times where he looked a bit lost, times where he looked disinterested, and the times he did get it, he had a player on his hammer all the time. A large part was because we didn't match the physicality the Dogs were applying towards Crippa, the kind of physicality that could have proved as valuable assistance. Now, I looked at the Carlton Sydney game from last year for this analysis, and those metrics I mentioned earlier, they're similar. I looked at the second quarter of that game, and Crippa didn't really get aid from his teammates allowing him to break loose. But what we did do was have our personnel in the middle constantly roaming and on the move in a very layered kind of way where everyone got a touch and Crippa could manufacture his own space. This year we hold position a lot more and there's a lot of linear straight running. We're very settled and it doesn't really frazzle the minds of the opponents either. So in the times where we do get the clearance, it isn't one where we're bursting out the middle, and so entries are more shallow. Perhaps this is a part of the problem with our conversion. But if we go back to his efficiency, 42%. Half of these kicks are rushed, the majority are misguided. This is because he just doesn't have time to think with opponents right on him. And the ones where he's got more time because he's taken a mark, to go back to our handball receive discussion, our players should recognise Crippa is not blessed with an excellent kick. Where's someone to assume responsibility instead of leaving him on an island to kick it himself? For comparison, we've seen it with Nick Dacos at Collingwood, where his players protect him to get as many touches to apply as much damage as possible. But in this game specifically, Tim English was the guy for the Dogs, which I saw get the same kind of treatment. On this kick-in, you can see English is running rings around Pitto and leading him around. You'll see the Bont serves as a little barricade for Pitto to bypass and allows the gap to be widened between English and his direct opponent. So it remains no surprise that English gets the grab. Just like the Bont identifies English is killing it around the ground, and the Dogs can use that to get a leg up, we should be identifying Crippa at his best is a difference maker and should be doing whatever we can to prevent his influence being quelled. We also should be identifying English's dominance and assisting Pitto rather than being late to the assignment and just letting English do his thing. As a general opinion, I'd like to see Crippa starting on the defensive side at the center circle where he can burst through. There was one example with Matt Kennedy which showed the kind of thing I envision with Crippa. If we can get one of ours running this way and put on a block for Crippa, at full effect, it would be an enjoyable watch. Next, blocking. I've got no idea why this is so uncommon nowadays. It's a tool that is incredibly underrated. Here's an example when the life of the game is gone. I rated Arthur Jones's game so much in this one, and here's one of the little things he did. You've got the outnumber at the contest, might as well be resourceful, and so he eliminates his direct matchup just by cutting across. Now, I actually talked about this with Brody Kemp on one occasion in last week's analysis. Let's look at it more elaborately. Here as Kennedy releases the handball, he just lets the Bont bypass him, and the handball is affected. We lose possession. I got told playing footy when I was younger, a handball should always lead to you spreading your arms out to shepherd immediately. This example shows the importance. As we move further on, we've got a 3-on-2 and we talked about the Dogs and what they did with the outnumber. Why has Wheaters just stepped aside to welcome 2 Dogs in pressuring Newman? You could have given him a few seconds to retreat and weigh up his options or run towards the boundary if you did put a block on. Instead, the advantage we had is null and void. And again, the outnumber is there. Arthur Jones's effectiveness in closing down on Akers as he forces a kick earlier than I think we would have liked. But you'd get extra valuable seconds if one of Sard or McGovern is trying to get in the way of Arthur Jones, who is closing down. Obviously, blocking takes many forms, and in marking contests, that's another way. Barely ever do I see one of our smaller players trying to make life difficult and block the path of a defender to ease things up on our key forwards. This is what we call sacrifice. There's just a lot of waiting, a lot of leading up at the footy only when the ball is kicked, and this sort of kills the influence should a player decide to block a defender. The keys need to be on the move more, so when a block happens, the gap you create is larger. I figure sometimes we do it on the defensive side, and with so many players clogging the 50 more often than not in Carlton games, you might as well make the most of a logjam and utilize the environment you have, to lose your opponent. The Warriors had a play where they do this thing called elevator doors in their championship years or their title winning years. That's something that comes to mind. And no, I'm not saying we need to set screens in the forward line and use a basketball play, but you can get creative with this. I do like this example, which is a mixture of a block by Newman to allow Cottrell to get the space he needs. And then Charlie is playing the small forwards role to eliminate the chance of an intercept. There's a few other pet peeves I had about this game. High on the list is communication. Now, this is an assumption, but I feel with some of our decision making, we're lacking that extra bit of communication. For example here, you can't tell me Doc or Wheaters can't yell out the ball isn't over, or someone can't just yell rush it, or even to call a man across amongst the scramble to even up the numbers. Like, that is shambolic. Or this example where Louis Young can't get his shit sorted and does one of the most awkward kicks I've ever seen. You need a player there to let him know he's got more time than he thinks. Or even this example where it's a 3-on-2. Louis Young just needs to clear the airspace and instruct Newman to stay down. Then you avoid a shit free kick being given away when it's incredibly avoidable. Overall, this game taught me a lot. I simply think we're not doing enough as a team and working together cohesively. We're doing this in glimpses and only sparingly. There's plenty of opportunity for it. We put ourselves in situations to execute it well, but it's always that final piece of the puzzle which is lacking. What do you think? Is there something I haven't mentioned that could help the Blues embrace the team spirit more? Thanks for tuning in. Show your support, share this around to Carlton fans you'd think would like this, and we'll be back for the round 10 analysis. So long, we'll see you soon. Bye for now.